So Tyler, we know you work with a lot of couples. You've sat in these moments with that front row seat of couples battling through the sexual brokenness in their marriage, and it's not just the struggling spouse that might bring this mindset. It can also be the spouse who ends up feeling betrayed. It's often the woman, and it's very true of them. I think that they may bring a similar mindset of thinking it's up to me to keep him from looking at pornography. It's up to our frequency to help him. They may even have been taught in their church upbringing that my body is not my own. And while there's I think a beautiful, healthy application of that when rightly understood, there's also many dangerous, manipulative ways in which that phrase has been used and left women feeling like I have no right to say no. It's my husband, it's my spouse, and so I need to give it to them so that they don't stray. When someone is operating with that kind of mindset, what kind of implications have you seen in the marriage when a partner is believing that myth?
There's that possibility, Nick, of losing one's identity. My identity is in this, we'll say, sexual relationship. And that just creates distance between two people. It's not authentic. It's not real. It's obligatory. Another implication of buying into the myth that marriage will fix everything is when it doesn't and disclosure occurs down the road and that the spouse was not even clear, had no indication that this was a problem, that's when a grenade goes off in the room. And again, often the female spouse is devastated. I had no idea. I thought this, I thought he was who he said he was. But now we're in this space that I didn't sign up for. And I'm being pulled into this recovery process because I feel deeply betrayed. I do want to be healthy, but I bought into the myth that this would fix everything.
Yeah. Well,
And I didn't even know what needed to be fixed.
yeah, and if that spouse is operating under the idea that I need to meet his needs, and then I come to find out that I wasn't meeting his needs and he wasn't even telling me, I could imagine that sense of being duped, being manipulated, and that feeling of taken advantage of. Like, after all I did for you and for our marriage sexually, you still were doing that? Like, I imagine it just really increases the pain. Is that right?
Absolutely is right. And again, I've heard over and over again from a betrayed spouse, I didn't sign up for this. I had no idea. I thought I was stepping in with him with a clean slate. And so I joined with him, met him in that space, and now I'm realizing, the truth has come out and it hasn't been truthful.
Right. And it is interesting that this myth on both ends, can be so challenging and shaming for both spouses. But another thing too, I was thinking about is not only if their belief is that I just need to have more sex with my spouse in order to help because marriage is supposed to fix it, then that actually could be you subjecting yourself to like traumatizing yourself. And we've talked about this too. The like how disclosure happens, how and not that this is like an outright form of sexual abuse, but like there is a point where it's like this pressure that I have to perform sexually for my spouse so that they don't, struggle anymore, act out, or have sex with other people, that like your trauma profile starts to look really scary. I mean, you literally are subjecting yourself to more and more trauma over time. And in the moment, you don't think that's what's happening. But if you were to, I just can tell you right now, if you look at how that person's life, continues, you'll see that come out sideways in a lot of different ways. And so there isn't just shame that happens. There's actual trauma that's being experienced by the betrayed partner. It's significant.
Well, I do want to point out that I think healthy sexual connection in a marriage is helpful. It can create resiliency in our life. I think it can create a sense of bondedness and of connection, of coupleship, that it feels like, man, no matter what's happening in my world, the two of us are together. Like, that's helpful. But at the same time, we need to recognize anywhere in my life I start to take responsibility for someone else's actions, we're in a dangerous place. And so as spouses, we need the freedom, you need the freedom to hear you are not responsible for keeping your spouse pure. You are not responsible for keeping them from making bad choices. That's their responsibility. And don't put that burden on yourself thinking if I just do X, Y, or Z enough, then they'll never struggle again, because it really opens the door to a whole lot more trauma and pain. And I think then that self-loathing of like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not enough? Because the message is, if I was only enough, they wouldn't struggle. And then they struggle, so I'm left thinking it must be me. And that's just a really destructive mindset that can be healed and we can recover from. But I would also want to say, I think we can keep ourselves free from saying that's not my role. That's not my burden to carry. That needs to stay appropriately with the other person. And the other thought that just came to mind too, that we need to make sure that in marriage, even though we do have a very kind of self-giving model that's given us in Scripture of like, put the other's needs first, look to honor them, and there's a lot of truth to that. I don't think that means we lose our agency. We don't lose the freedom to say no. And I've heard some speakers talk about it to say that if my spouse doesn't have the freedom to say no for whatever reason, then their yes really doesn't mean much. And we go to what Sheila Ray Gregoire has talked about with duty sex, and their heart's not even in it. They're just a body that's there for that person's physical needs. And it's like, that's not, you could call that something, but that's not sex as God designed or created it. That's a totally different thing. And without agency, it's not really sexual connection, because the sexual connection that God designed involves both parties willingly coming with kind of that self-sacrificing attitude. And I can't do that unless I have a choice to do it. So I think if you're engaged in anything in your marriage where you don't feel like you have agency to actually say no or do what you feel is healthy, it's in the long term going to have a destructive impact on your relationship.
Yeah. And it just because it's super interesting, if you look at Sheila Ray Gregoire's research that she did, there are physical manifestations of what that trauma of duty sex does to the female body, which can hinder sexual pleasure. And honestly, the actual act of it can become more painful. There's a lot at play there.